and then you're using that algorithm to further train other unlabeled data sets, and so on, right? You kind of like, you take this small data set of 5 samples and you turn it into 20 samples, and you turn it into 60 samples, and then you turn it into 80 samples, and then all of a sudden you might have something you can work with, right? So that's kind of like where that bootstrap approach comes from, where in those early stages you have to reuse data, right? You have to reuse your samples. And that's what's being illustrated in this chart. But again, that's not really going to be a common thing, right? It's not always going to be something that you're going to need, because so many projects that you're going to be working with are going to be big data projects. Okay, so I hope you guys are with me on that. If not, let me know in the chat. All right, let me go back to the chat. Remember, the question in front of the chat right now is coming from Ravindran. Is cross-validation used in supervised learning? So let me know what you think about that, chat. Ravindran says, Ravindran adds, because based on the definition, it compares only in supervised learning, data is labeled, i.e. only correct pairs. Is he right? Let me know, guys. Yassine says, I think it is used only in supervised learning as it requires the existence of labels, outputs, and targets. Okay. Who agrees with Yassine? Let me know. Ravindran says, in simple terms, is Bootstrap multiple randomly picked sample space from a single data set? Well, Ravindran, that definition can fit cross-validation also, right? So yes, the randomness is part of it, but it's part for both cross-validation and Bootstrap. The difference for Bootstrap is that you can reuse samples within the same training set, which typically you wouldn't need to do, right? But that's the bootstrapping aspect of it. Okay. Mahmoud says, I can't watch live now. Will you be posting it later in your account, please? Yes. As soon as the session finishes, it's archived on my YouTube, and then I usually put a notice on Instagram to say when the replay is available. But yes, Mahmoud, you're welcome to watch it afterwards. Everything is posted there. Thank you for the question. Sarvesh says, wouldn't bootstrapping change the distribution of training data? Yes, absolutely it would, Sarvesh. That's a great observation. And that's one of the I don't want to say dangers, but that is one of the results of Bootstrap. That you are kind of, you're introducing a lot of new risks into your training, right? But again, this is one of those situations where you're only going to do it where you have very, very limited data and there's no hope of getting more data, right? When that happens, that's when you want to say, okay, let's try this bootstrap approach, right? Like you basically just say, I have no choice but to reuse my samples, right? So yeah, it does affect that distribution, right? But what else are you going to do, right? But you can use the bootstrap in the manner I just described so that you can get to a point where you don't have to do that anymore. You can turn, I don't know, 20 labeled samples or whatever the case, a small number of now labeled samples to a point where you can now use something else, right? Like I said, turn an unsupervised problem into a supervised problem and move up from there. But those initial stages are still a bootstrap approach, and that's where the bootstrap term comes from, right? If you guys aren't familiar, well, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing that this whole bootstrapping name comes from software development, because in software development, there's a similar concept of bootstrapping, right? How do you write a new a new software development compiler? Well, you got to use another compiler to help you write the initial parts of the code to bootstrap that the new compiler, the one you want to write, up, and then you can use the new compiler to compile itself, right? It's the same process or the same concept here. Okay. Amrapali says, I think cross-validation is used in unsupervised as well. All right, I appreciate that answer. Who agrees with Amrapali?